Hello, welcome, and thanks for joining me. Let's spend a few minutes together chatting about Madonna in a Fur Coat by Sabahattin Ali. This book was originally published back in 1943 in Turkish. It was originally published in Istanbul, Turkey, and it did not get its first English translation until 2016. And the translators were Maureen and Alexander Dawe. And then that edition was published in the US in 2017, and that is the edition that I read this electronic version of. So, Madonna in a Fur Coat by Sabahattin Ali. So, I heard about this book because of a viewer. It was a viewer recommendation on one of my other videos. Left a comment, why don't you read Madonna in a Fur Coat? And the title sounded so intriguing to me, I decided to look it up, and then the book itself sounded really interesting, so I decided to give it a read. And I'm really glad that I did because it was a wonderful reading experience. It's a beautiful, bittersweet story that I just loved. So one disclaimer before I get too far into the video, I want to be really careful in how I present the book because part of the pleasure of reading the book to me was the gentle and beautiful way that the story unfolds. It's not that it's plot driven or cliffhanger-ish, but it's just the way that it unfolded to me was very beautiful, and so I wouldn't want to detract from that. But what the book's basically about, as the story starts, we have an unnamed narrator who has lost his job, and he seems to have a bit of a difficulty finding another job, and he is sort of at this point where he really needs his friends. He's sort of despairing, and he's at that point where he really needs his friends, but that's at the point that he feels like he's the most abandoned, that he doesn't, that he can't really connect with his friends. And I think that's part of the human condition. It happens sometimes when you need people the most, that's when they seem the most distant. And that's sort of the emotional place, I think, where this narrator is. And he's out walking around in Ankara one day, and he runs across someone that he knows who does stop and talk to him. And he tells him, that, well, come to my house and we'll have a chat. So eventually they do. And the guy says, maybe I can arrange a job for you at the firm where I work, which he does. And so this unnamed narrator then is given a office to share with what's to become the main character of the novel, and that is a man named Rafe Effendi, who by this time is sort of early middle age-ish. And he is a very quiet, unassuming person who people in the office are a bit mean to. He's one of these people, I think, that is just so unassuming that people just don't notice them, and don't think of them at all. They don't give them any thought. And I've known people, I think, where this is the case, and people really are abusive of him to some degree. And the guy just sort of quietly does his own thing, no matter, how rude people are to him or how sort of snippy and nasty they are to him. He sort of just does his own thing. The narrator then actually at the beginning of the book sort of describes Rafe, and I thought I would just read that description. It's a paragraph long, and it really describes the character, and it also gives a good idea about how the book is written, the beautiful way that the book is written. So it says, he was, in the end, the sort of man who causes us to ask ourselves, what does he live for? What does he find in life? What logic compels him to keep breathing? What philosophy drives him as he wanders the earth? But we ask in vain if we fail to look beyond the surface, if we forget that beneath each surface lurks another realm, in which a caged mind whirls alone. It is perhaps easier to dismiss a man whose face gives no indication of an inner life. And what a pity that is! A dash of curiosity is all it takes to stumble upon treasures we never expected. A dash of curiosity is all it takes to stumble upon treasures we never expected. I think that is such a beautiful line. So our narrator does get curious. He got a little curious about Rafe because he just really stays to himself. He works doing translations in German, and he doesn't ever really find out all that much about him because this guy, Rafe, is just such a kind of closed-off person. Just sort of really gives him sort of mundane answers. I think Rafe at this point is at the point where he knows people aren't interested in it. He stopped sort of trying, And so, but we do learn that over time that Rafe and he sort of I wouldn't say they originally, become friends per se, but he does get to know him a little bit better through a series of events. We find out quite a bit more about Rafe's life outside of the office that I won't go into here, but ultimately, the narrator is given a notebook, and in this notebook is written down a story from Rafe's earlier years, from about 15 years earlier, if I remember correctly, sort of right after, I think, World War One. Rafe had been sent away by his father. Rafe had sort of had a hard time settling on any kind of work. He wanted to be an artist, and his father actually okayed for him to go to Istanbul and go to art school, but he had gone there and had found that, as an artist, you have to express yourself, and he found that he was really unable to do that, so he couldn't be an artist. So his father recognizes he lacks ambition. His father is sort of this businessman who is sort of, I guess, disturbed that he has this son. Anyway, he decides to send him away to Germany to learn the soap business because the family has some olive groves and also a soap factory. So they send Rafe away to Germany to learn more about the soap business, and this also doesn't really seem to be working out for Rafe when he's in Germany. But while he's there, one day he comes across a painting. And the painting is a woman in a fur coat. It is a self-portrait by the artist. And so, through random things that happen, without giving too much away, he eventually meets the artist. And the artist's name is Maria. She is half Jewish, and she is a very interesting character. She becomes the other main character. So then the second half of this book, the first half is this story of where the narrator and Rafe are working in this office, and the narrator is getting to know Rafe's life. And then the second half of the book is Rafe's life in Germany and his life with Maria, the one Madonna in a fur coat. So I don't want to go too much more into the relationship that developed. There is a relationship that develops between Rafe and Maria, the Madonna in a fur coat, while he's in Germany, and it is just so beautifully drawn. The characters are in a way opposite. So Maria wears this fur coat, and to me this fur coat sort of symbolized a wild animal who wants to be loved. If you've ever, maybe seen an animal, like a wild animal, like a feral cat or a feral dog even, who wants to be loved, but they don't want to get too close to you, right? They don't trust you. And so this is kind of Maria. And then Rafe, at this point, he feels the first connection really that he's ever felt in his life to anyone. And so they have this sort of dynamic going on between them that plays out in beautiful and bittersweet ways that I don't want to give away. But so my thoughts about the book. I mentioned how sort of delicately the story is presented, but one kind of recurring theme is this how happenstance. There is how meeting. You never know when your life is going to be interrupted or shifted due to a random meeting with someone. So this happens, several times in the book. So we have the narrator at the very beginning who randomly meets the acquaintance on the streets in Ankara who gets the job then in the place where he's randomly sort of assigned to share an office with Rafe Effendi, who becomes this person that he becomes sort of fascinated with his strange, what he considers sort of strange life. And then Rafe, happens upon this painting that really shifts his life. And then by a happenstance, another random sort of meeting, he meets the artist of the painting herself, the Madonna, Maria, the Madonna in a fur coat. And then there's another really big sort of random meeting at the end of the book that I don't want to talk about at all because that would sort of really detract from anyone who decided to read the book. But it is perhaps maybe the most important random meeting of the entire book. I think for Rafe Effendi, the meetings the random meeting, when he random met the unnamed narrator at the beginning of the novel, when he randomly ran into the painting, and then when he met the artist, and then this random meeting at the end of the book, they sort of escalate in importance to his life. I didn't mention that when he's in Germany, so this notebook, this is back in time, so that was really kind of important. So the first part of the book takes place basically probably in 1943 when the book was published. The second part of the book that pertains to the story written in the notebook takes place earlier. It takes place when he's younger, and it's right after World War I. So it's about 15 years before the beginning of the book. So it's sort of backwards. So the book starts out in what the present day was when it was published, and then the notebook takes us back in time where Rafe sort of tells us his backstory. So in the first part of the book, we learn Rafe's story, current story, his current life, and then in the second half of the book, that's where we learn the backstory, and then we wrap it up at the end with our unnamed narrator, reflecting on his experience in getting to know Rafe and Rafe's story, which, by default, we did too, because he just told it to us in this book. So, such a beautiful book. One thing other than, is really how books from around the world, like this book was published in 1943. I think it's been very popular from what I can tell. I didn't have a lot of time I actually meant to, but haven't looked up the author or the history of this book in Turkey, but my understanding is it is still, popular in Turkey. And so, but how things get chosen to get translated into English and what doesn't, what all we're missing, is my point, I think, is that I know there must just still be tons of literature from all around the world that we have yet to see in English. And, not that I would have a time to get around to all of it if it were available in English, but it would be nice if it were. So maybe someday, right? So I think I'll stop the chat with that. Thank you to the commenter who recommended this for a read, because it was a relatively short novel, but just beautiful, and I enjoyed it very, very, very much. So my next chat coming up next is going to be a little old school sword and sorcery fantasy, The Knight of the Swords by Michael Moorcock. So that will be coming up next. I have already finished this, so I should have a chat coming up on this very soon. So until next time, take care. Bye.